Time to talk about all the books I've read recently and tell you what's good, what's not, and what is somewhere in between. I'm going to finish this with a fantastic classic from the 50s, a decade I'm not particularly enamored with, but a good book nonetheless. I'm going to talk about a few odds and ends on booktube, so if you're just here for the books, here is a timestamp for you to skip ahead to. It's been a while since I've done one of these videos, and that's because I read the Women's Prize long list, and I've made a video about that. I think that sort of thing is going to be the norm for this channel going forward. You're going to get a recent reads video when every about 10 books or so, but in between you're going to get themed videos when I have a theme that I'd like to read about. I just don't see the point in reviewing books twice. Some housekeeping. If you've not yet seen, I will be running a readathon with the fabulous Gemma from Gem of Books next month. Misery May. A readathon for Thomas Hardy fans and Misery readers in general. Misery readers unite. I will link Gemma and my announcement videos in the show notes so that you can get all the details. We would love you to join in with us. There's a group read of Jude the Obscure, Hardy's most miserable work. There's a Voxer group set up that you can join, that we can all discuss just the horribleness that will be Jude. My Voxer is in the show notes. I just can't wait. Jude, Aunt Drusilla, Arabella, Mr. Philistine, Sue, Little Father Time. Oh, it's going to be glorious. People are going to be heartbroken. I want to quickly apologise to BookTube. I haven't been watching a lot of your videos these past few weeks. And when I have been watching, I haven't really been commenting, which I don't feel I have to comment when I watch a video. And I don't always as a rule, but there's this kind of idea that if a booktuber watches a video and doesn't comment, did the tree even fall down or something? I've been quite busy with uni of late. I love how every subject has an assignment due at the same time. I think that's intentionally curated to point out that I am a grown-ass man with no organizational skills whatsoever. I also caught hand, foot, and mouth disease off my 1-year-old niece. So if you saw a bunch of blisters all over my face in a recent video, that's why, but it did knock me out for a few days prior to those blisters turning up with a fever. I had to spend some considerable time asleep and swearing that it was about 30 degrees colder than it actually was. I'm fine now, these things happen, but BookTube has sort of really missed out. And I had to scrap a few videos that I was going to do, and that includes my Trans Girl April TBR. It's kind of a bit late to put it up now, maybe it's not, but I thought I'd put up the books over on the side while I discuss a few little things so you can see what books I'm planning to read. I have actually finished a couple of these books, but they're going to get their own special wrap up. I have really loved seeing just how many booktubers have gotten behind this readathon. It has been fabulous. But I have noticed a few people who haven't been joining in, and I know there's a lot of readathons going on, and you don't always want to join in every readathon, and people want to mood read and so on and so forth, and all of those things. I wanted to address one of the reasons why I think creators might be avoiding discussing the trans topic, and that is the fear that supporting trans people will lead to some kind of backlash and a loss of subscribers. And I just wanted to tell creators that had that concern that every time I have said something to support trans people, said that trans identities are valid, that I have gained subscribers. Not initially. You seem to always lose subscribers when you post a video and then gain them back. That's with all videos, regardless of whether you support trans people or not. But I have gotten more subscribers than I've lost due to that. And what I mean by that is my video stats, not my channel as a whole. I'm not getting subscribers from elsewhere to cover up that fact. I mean, the people who have directly subscribed because of the video they have watched, I have always gained more than I have lost. And that is because there is more support, more acceptance, and more just general love for trans people in the bookish community than there is the opposite. So if that fear is stopping you from joining in this wonderful readathon and just supporting trans people in general, know that my experience is very much the opposite of that, and I really encourage you to join in and be part of this wonderful readathon. And just, trans people are joyful. There are also a couple of other readathons I'd like to draw your attention to. The Translated Indian Lit readathon and People April. I think that it's very easy to do People April in conjunction with Trans Girl April. There is a lot of choices that will cover both readathons. Also, there is a massive queer history in India. Of course, India has the third general, the Hijras, and I just want to put that in people's minds if they're struggling to get to all three of these wonderful readathons. Cheat by picking a book that counts for all three readathons. This is nothing to do with anything, but I just have to have a tiny whinge come maths nerd gets on a soapbox. There are just too many booktubers who are reading decimal numbers incorrectly. And I've let it go. And I've let it go, and I've started singing that stupid Disney song, and let's face it, Ella is no Lizzo, she's no Bowie. When numbers are after a decimal point, you say them individually. Pi to 2 decimal places is 3.14. It is not 3.14. That is incorrect. If you give a book a star rating and it's 3 3/4 stars, that's 3.75. It is not 3.75. If you're a booktuber who has been making that mistake, I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at Walt Disney. He was a Nazi sympathizer. Actually, was he a Nazi sympathizer? Is that a vicious rumor that wasn't true? Doesn't matter. He was rich, and something about needle eyes don't pass camels, or I don't know. Let's get on to the books and not random number stuff. And we'll start with the DNFs, Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. This book was not on my radar until the Women's Prize discussion started, and a lot of people started picking this for the long list, saying that it was marketed very poorly, and I disagree. This book was telling, not showing. The writing was extremely poor, and I DNF'd this one really early on. There are so many books tackling this topic and doing such a wonderful job. It upset me to see something that was written this badly be so hyped while other books go unnoticed. Biography of X by Catherine Lacey. Now, I loved Pew by Catherine Lacey, but this felt just like the diet version of that. Lacey is clearly really interested in this idea of identity and identity as other people see it. And I think if I had read this before Pew, I would have enjoyed it much more, but I'm not sure I would have ever read Pew. I had high expectations going into this, and this book delivered half of what Pew delivered with twice as many words. It really lacked that tension that Pew had, the question of safety that was central to Pew. It just made you want to keep reading. That wasn't there in the Biography of X. Lacey can, however, write a sentence. She is clearly very talented. I think that this book is a slow reveal, and I also think that it would more appeal to fans of authors such as Rachel Cusk. What Moves the Dead, T. Kingfisher. I've realised recently that quite a few of the books I've enjoyed over the last few years have been horror novels. That's weird. It's not a genre I thought I ever really read, but genre is a ridiculous way to classify books, and it only serves marketers and businesses, not readers. Well, actually, that's not true. Some people really like fantasy or romance, but that makes no sense to me how you can just like one genre. Whatever you do, you. I thought I'd try a couple of horror books. I borrowed this one from the library. I read a chapter. It wasn't good enough. The writing didn't work for me. It does seem to have very up and down reviews too, so maybe it works better for some people and not others. When We Were Sisters, Fatimah Ashgar. It is all about the writing today, and this was utterly terrible writing. It is written intentionally fragmented, and I appreciate that the author is trying something, but I don't think that they're talented enough to pull it off. This was really pretty close to an instant bail. Very clear early on to me that I wasn't going to enjoy this, but I really do recommend trying a few pages of this one before you commit to it. You'll know pretty straight away if you're going to love it or hate it. I also noticed today that this made the Carol Shields shortlist, and I have to question if maybe I pulled the trigger on this too early, if maybe this weird writing style required a period of adjustment, which I certainly didn't give it. So if you read this and if you liked it, let me know if you instantly loved this one or if it took some winning over before you enjoyed it. A Spell of Good Things, Ayobami Adebayo. I don't know if I should include this in my DNFs. I had this one on loan from the library. There was quite a queue behind me. I had to read it, but I wasn't in the mood for it. I knew I wasn't going to get it back soon and that I couldn't renew it. So I just tried to read it, and I really wasn't in the mood for it. And instead of forcing through and not enjoying this book, I decided to return it to the library and to give it a fair chance at some point in the future. If I owned this book, I would have just put it down and waited until I was ready. It would have gotten read at some point. But because this was a library book and because I've returned it, it really does feel like a DNF to me, and it's gonna be a couple of months before I get back to this. So I don't know, is this a DNF? What do you think? It just feels like one to me. We'll see later in this video that a DNF doesn't have to be forever. On to the books I finished. Normally I would discuss this from best to worst, but I wanted to start with The Secrets of Hartwood Hall by Katie Lumsden. Mostly because I already have a full review out on this book, which I'll link in the show notes. Also, I don't really feel like I have a worst book that I finished this period. I basically think that I've been very, very good at DNFing. I like everything that I've finished. So instead of starting with a book and saying this was the worst book that I liked, I'm going to start with a highlight. Katie has a booktube channel, Books and Things. I was a little bit concerned going into this, what if I didn't like it? Fortunately, I really did like it. It is a historical fiction set in the 1850s. There is a ghost story, and it is really centering Margaret, a widow who hasn't really been provided for by her husband. But because of her standing, because of her class, she only has a few positions open to her, governess being one. This is a really real, well-documented problem that women had at the time. I really enjoyed this exploration of a widow who had all of these social concerns wrapped up with these very real-world problems of needing money to live. She gets this job at Hartwood Hall, tutoring a young boy. Rumour has it that Hartwood Hall is haunted, and there's a fun mystery to this novel. Really, really good writing, great storytelling, lots of literary references, mostly to books released in the 1840s and 1850s. It was just an engaging and really enjoyable read. If you like Sarah Waters, Natasha Pulley, or the Brontes, then this is going to be a good book for you. The Echo Wife, Sarah Gailey. This was the March pick for Ange and Amy's Fiction Addiction book club. This is a sci-fi novel about a woman who works in cloning only to find out that her husband has cloned her and subsequently leaves her for her clone. This was mostly fluffy with some chewy bits if you were interested. It's simple, it's fun, it's feminist, but you're not going to die if you don't read this book. I thought that the themes in this novel were the best and the worst bit. What does it mean to be human? Nature versus nurture. Ideas around controlling people and contrasting that to a relationship between a man and a woman. The expendability of the relationship and what does it mean to create a human. I really liked all of this, and I really enjoyed the different layers Gailey put in their novel. I just wish they went a bit deeper and they included a little bit more on this. I wanted more of what they were delivering. You can see bits of Frankenstein and bits of Never Let Me Go. Wow, they're two novels I have completely different opinions on. I think Gailey is similar to those novels, but lighter than both of those novels as well. Hello Beautiful and Napolitano. This is a story about four sisters from an Italian-American family growing up in Chicago in the 80s. Although the story spans 4 decades, this novel is influenced by or inspired by Little Women. You don't need to have read Little Women to enjoy it, but if you are one of the few people who have never read Little Women, it spoils what happens to Beth, which I think is just about the best known plot in almost all of literature. But if you've managed to avoid that and you want a surprise, rather than a retelling, I'd call it a modern reimagining of Little Women. What it might be like if it were written today. None of the sisters really match up with any of the sisters in Little Women. Rather, Anne Napolitano has meshed up various ideas and traits from the different sisters and combined them in new ways. This is a book about 4 sisters who go through that stage of becoming adults, finding significant others and having children, and how their relationships with each other's and their parents change. Eventually the children they have become bigger and they become part of the story, and we see how their parents' relationships affect the children's relationships with their aunties and their cousins. I feel like I've made this book sound quite plotless, and that's not true at all. But there are things that happen early in this novel that shape the direction it moves in, and I feel like they're spoilers. Although I think the attraction in this novel is to look at a family and to see how these women grow from teenagers into adults and how the family dynamic changes. I think the central central theme is love, both romantic and familial. And I think Little Women is a really good way of judging if you will enjoy this book. If Little Women is your favourite novel of all time, pick this book up. If you hate Little Women, avoid it. For me, this is just a solid, good book. It takes a little bit too long to get where it was going, and nothing in this book is very revolutionary. If anything, I would say that this is the work of a talented author who could maybe be a little bit more ambitious. It was still a very pleasant read. I will read more books that are worse than this novel than I will better. I gave it 4 stars. The Saint of Lost Things, Tish Delaney. I had previously DNF'd this book as a physical read, but I loved the audiobook of Delaney's first novel before my actual heart breaks. And something told me this was the kind of book that would appeal to me more as an audio. And that was correct. You should know, I am an accent trollop. I am an accent strumper, and an Irish accent is a good one. I know that saying Irish accent is silly. People from Belfast, Dublin, Galway and Cork all have very different accents, but I enjoy listening to them all. This is based in rural Northern Ireland and the accent matches that, similar to Belfast but also quite different. Lindy is in her 50s. She lives with her Auntie Belle, twin sister of her mother who died when Lindy was young. Belle hates Lindy, and they live on the property of Lindy's grandpa Morris, who also hates Lindy. And he's a violent, abusive old man who fortunately lives separate to them. He still sees them, he expects to govern them and to attend to, and I quote, the burden those fucking females are. He is not a nice man. Lindy's father was a traveller, and there is a fair bit of resentment towards Lindy for, well, basically even being alive. I've not seen that kind of racism before, and I find it fascinating because it is just not at all related to skin colour. And also it existed within a family. Lindy is trying to track down her father, and she wants to see where she came from. But early on, she reveals that she also gave up a baby. And we move back to the 1970s and her time in London, a place she didn't want to come home from. So why did she come home from it? What's the deal with her baby? Who was her father? Why is her mother dead? All of this is revealed one at a time, and this book is quite an emotional and an unrelentingly horrible book. The characters are well crafted and in various stages of unlikable, from a little bit unlikable to extremely unlikable. But this novel is missing the emotional writing of Delaney's first novel, Before My Actual Heart Breaks. That book is amazing. This is a good book, but this is just not as well written as Before My Actual Heart Breaks. And that is probably due to Lindy being a very different character to Mary, the protagonist of Before My Actual Heart Breaks. Lindy is much more emotionally distant, while Mary felt all of her emotions at once. And Delaney is a talented writer, and she is a faithful writer to her characters. I just don't feel like the pieces she constructed here added up in the same way they did in her last book. So if this sounds like the sort of book you would like, read Delaney's first book, Before My Actual Heart Breaks. Ghost Music by Anu. This is a strange book. This is a magical realism novel, and I did finish this without once defenestrating. So it must be amazing. However, I'm going to say right from the start that this was a 3-star read. Son Yang, a piano teacher, is married to Bowen. They live together with his mother-in-law. One day, a package of mushrooms is delivered. They're rare and native to Bowen's hometown, and Bowen's mother insists that they won't last if they send them back, so she shows Son Young how to make them into a soup and stir fry. Then more mushrooms arrive, a different variety this time. Mushrooms continue to arrive for no reason over the coming weeks and months. Always a different variety. Then a letter arrives from Bayu, a famous pianist who has been missing for 10 years. He claims he's been sending the mushrooms and asks Song Young to meet him. They don't have a past. It's just randomly been contacted by a celebrity pianist who have sent you mushrooms for 3 months. Seems reasonable and like. This book is about loneliness, human connection, music, and a strange mushroom creature who talks to Song Young in her dreams, although maybe they're not actually dreams, maybe they're real. The themes, they could have hit me over the head slightly harder, but at the same time, they were just a bit simple. So it's only as I'm editing this video that I realise that this book is very subversive and critical of the Chinese government, and a little bit of a mind revelation. I very, very stupid sometimes. The magical realism aspects of this book were actually pretty gentle, although I'm not really sure what they added, and in the end, I'm not really sure exactly what happened. Why were there so many mushroom references? Since reading this book, all I've wanted to do is eat stir-fried mushrooms and noodles, so instead of finishing my review of this book and saying something thoughtful, I'm going to give you a recipe. Slice king oyster, white, shiitake, and regular oyster mushrooms. Stir-fry them with garlic and ginger. Put your aromatics in the wok first. Try to cook like you're not white. Add oyster sauce, spring onion greens, sesame seeds, and stir through some noodles. Add a dash of rice wine vinegar, soy and chili to taste. Yum. Big Swiss. Jen Beagin. This is a weird novel. A woman works as a transcriptionist in a small town for a local sex therapist. Because the town is so small, she recognizes the voices on the tape. She starts to learn the town's kinky secrets, and she becomes obsessed with this woman who is Swiss and tall and hence earns the nickname Big Swiss. Then one day they meet each other at the dog park and somehow become friends and maybe more. This is a very satirical novel. The recordings from the sex therapist is basically a lesson in how to be inappropriate and to not listen to people. At one point, Big Swiss literally says, "Let's try this thing where I speak and you shut up and listen," only for the therapist to then attempt to change the topic and direct the conversation to when she last masturbated. He was always asking inappropriate and creepy sexual questions, and it's kind of hilarious. It's kind of cringe, and I am really not a big fan of cringe comedy. This just didn't go very deep into the cringe territory. It was much more take the piss. One of the things I think this book is examining is communication and how that affects people's relationships and power dynamics. One of the things that seems really weird looking back on this book is that Greta, our transcriptionist, is considerably older than Big Swiss, and that is not reflected in their relationship. If anything, it feels the opposite. Big Swiss is playing an almost stereotypical German character, pointing out everyday things that don't actually make sense and just saying exactly what she thinks, being blunt to the point of almost being rude. Yet, at the same time, she seems incredibly worldly. If you enjoy literary fiction where the main character has no direction whatsoever and just does messed up shit for no reason at all, and yet that still seems completely consistent with her character, this is the sort of book for you. It's really kind of Atesha Moshfegh-esque. If Atesha Moshfegh was in a happy, well-adjusted place in her life. Actually, I think flip that. Moshfegh is probably actually in a happy, well-adjusted place in her life, which makes it easier for her to write about really dark issues. Beagin is probably depressed and living hand-to-mouth and writing about that. Greta is this very lost millennial character, but she's significantly older and still hasn't figured things out yet. I can definitely relate to that. Indelible City, Dispossession and Defiance in Hong Kong by Louisa Lim. Shortlisted for the Stella Prize, and I haven't responded to that shortlist yet. So let's just say right now that I'm shocked that All That's Left Unsaid missed out, but I'm not that shocked that this book made it. This is a non-fiction about Hong Kong. What I think is fascinating is Hong Kong is so often set up as England versus China, and when you look at the sources of all the information that this book is based on, they're so biased. And it's really an excellent example of why historians need to evaluate their sources and what their sources were saying. Neither China or England were really considering the local people of Hong Kong. Neither China or England were worried about accuracy or anything other than preserving their own power. And this book is really a history of Hong Kong told through the eyes of locals and showing China and England acting in their own self-interest. The history goes up to the recent protests and it spends the largest chunk of time there. I thought the way China blackmailed people was so interesting, offering you money and a nice job, taking you out to these nice meals and keeping your family locked up. Elbow, if you're watching, I'll stop calling you a sellout Tory Murdoch puppet for a new house, 100k and 3 days a week working in a library. And just for parody, Peter Dutton, if you're watching, nobody likes you. You're a racist. I really liked the beginning and the ending of this book. The middle part was a little bit slow for me. The early part was basically how the British Empire was evil and ignorant and how they screwed over the people of Hong Kong and things like the opium trade. The later part being how China was basically doing the same with less opium and more being China. I enjoyed the author's own account of her time in Hong Kong, raising children there, and what she was accepting as normal, and being an academic and spending time between Melbourne and Hong Kong, and suddenly realising that she can leave and live elsewhere. Just a thoroughly interesting non-fiction book. The classics. I finally read some. Giving myself a small classics TBR worked, so I'm going to continue to do that and this time pick 3 books. The Death of the Heart by Elizabeth Bowen, The Street by Anne Petrie, and Blindness by Jose Saramago. Is Blindness a classic? It's about as old as Bridget Jones. That's a classic, right? I want to give myself a caveat this time though. I want to say Misery May will be starting soon. And I will be creating a TBR for that readathon, obviously, and that will probably include quite a lot of classics and probably some Thomas Hardy. If I don't get to these 3 books during the last few days of April, I'll probably hold them over and start them in June sometime. On to the 2 classics I have recently read. Hitting a straight lick with a crooked stick, Zora, Neale, Hurston. This is a collection of short stories, and with almost any collection of short stories you will get the comment, some of these are better than others, and that's true. I like short story collections where there is a connecting theme, and I think Hurston has done that very well. There is a real commonality of this theme of a husband and wife and sacrifice of the husband for the wife, and unconscious racism and employment and being forced to fit into white society, and conscious racism as well. The sacrifices the husband makes in order to have the woman that he loves and to fit into white society. I don't feel like Hurston has been able to go very deep and nuanced in that theme though, in the discussion of that, just because these are short stories. But what she has done is produce this example multiple times with different characters and different outcomes. And not every story has this theme, but a lot of them do. And what this whole book does is create this strong picture of a community at this point in time that Hurston was writing. And I thought that this was really worthwhile and really interesting, because I don't think I've seen black characters from this era and this time period in this place centered in a book before. The only piece of literature that I can compare this to that I think that might also do it is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. It's kind of a powerful message to the uniqueness of literature and how transcendent culture is, that this is the only example I can say. Thoroughly interesting for that point in time that it's captured really well. I have saved a great book for last, The Go-Between, L.P. Hartley. This is one of these schoolboy coming-of-age novels, boarding school. It's a very common style of book written in the 50s or 60s, but it's still even written today, and mostly by predominantly English men. Leo is staying with his friend Marcus at Brandon Hall, and it's coming into the summer, and Leo's family are so poor that they can't afford to buy him summer clothing, so they send him off with all of his winter clothes. But Marcus is from a completely different class. He has several servants in the hall that he lives. So there is this lovely clash of cultures, and it's repeated in this novel in a few places. Leo forms this kind of harmless crush on Marcus's older sister Marion, who is of marriageable age and is very nice to Leo, at one point noticing that he is too hot and buying him a summer outfit. Marcus gets sick and needs to be quarantined for a few days, and Leo plays on his own, meeting Ted, a local farmer, who asks him to take a message to Marion. Leo also meets Lord Trimmingham, who he nicknames Triton after the Greek god, and it seems that both men are interested in spending time with Marion. Marion, for her part, is delightfully quick-witted, and while a lot of the emotional impact of the story revolves around Marion's character, I really appreciate the sense of humour she has been drawn with. It's very dry, and it can both easily diffuse a situation or be quite needly. Leo starts running messages between Ted and Marion, and it's clear that there is a love triangle going on, which is complicated by class and expectation. Leo starts to feel guilty at the situation, liking everybody that's involved and becoming convinced convinced that he's going to bring about harm to somebody by continuing these secret messages. What I really like is that no character in here is really demonized, that everybody is actually pretty nice, but that they're also quite self-serving, which I think is such an accurate picture of just human nature in general. I think this is a book that delivers on quite a few levels. I think having a young man as the narrator who doesn't understand everything that's going on, but is old enough to be present and give you details so you understand, that really worked for me. And it's not difficult, but you have to interpret Leo. You have to interpret what's going on for Leo. Marion's feelings towards Ted and Triton are actually a bit complex. The feelings back are less so, but I love the exploration of those relationships. Then there is this slow tension as you realize what's going on. The plot, which really does go unnoticed for most of it, ticks along in the background, and then it really comes to the forefront and it satisfies you. Then there are these themes of love and class, belonging, acceptance, and being used. It's complex and nothing short of wonderful, and it's not a bad pick for Misery May. There are a lot of classics written in the 50s, but if I'm honest, it's an era where the most popular novels are so often terrible. I'm looking at you, Kerouac, you hack typist. So it's really nice to see that I don't have to scratch the surface too hard to find a real gem of a novel. Please make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video. If you've missed my video where I've reviewed every book on the Woman's Prize long list, click over here and tell me in the comment section if you've read any of these books, if you have any thoughts or agree or disagree with anything I've said. Bye bye.